guys, and welcome to part 3 of chapter 19. We're finally going to hopefully wrap up this really long chapter, and we're going to wrap it up with going over fungi and then a couple of other like protozoans and even some technically non-microscopic critters. So let's go and get into it. So first off, we're going to talk about mycoses of the hair, the nails, the skin. What is mycosis? This is basically an infection caused by fungi. How can we remember this word? Because mycosis kind of sounds like my goshis, like my gosh, because fungi are disgusting. And you're like, my gosh, when you see them. You know what I'm talking about? They're just, I cannot, like fungal infections, oh, I don't know why, I cannot stomach them nearly as well as I do with all the other infections. So props to you, amazing nurses, for taking care of this world. Thank you. Okay, so mycoses are like, my gosh, ew, fungi. Okay, sorry. Anyways, so the disease is caused by fungi. I'm actually going to capitalize this, not capitalize this, but put this in bold. Usually the source of these mycoses are fungi that are opportunistic, and the way we characterize mycoses is to see where in the body they occur. So they could be either superficial, which just means that like really right on the outer surface, just on top pretty much. Cutaneous, so this is when they occur in the skin. Subcutaneous is basically in your hypodermis or in your muscle tissue, and then systemic is when it goes ahead and invades all the other systems in place. And this could get really bad. So systemic mycoses are quite terrible. Okay, so let's look at some of our mycoses. So the first one, this is superficial mycoses. These are quite common, right? Because they just affect the upper layer. Here they're confined to the hair, nails, and outer skin layers. They're acquired by direct contact with either the hyphae, and if you guys remember hyphae, those are just tubular extensions that come out of little worm-like extensions that come out of fungi, or the spores of fungi. So basically what they use for asexual reproduction. So this is how they, this is how they're acquired. So they can be acquired either through direct contact with something or even through fomites. Fomites are, remember, those infectious, those objects that have whatever parasite or whatever on them. So an object that has a fungus, a fungal hyphae or a spore, that can cause an issue. An example of a superficial mycosis is pityriasis. I can't pronounce it anymore. I could pronounce it 2 seconds ago. Pityriasis, there we go, pityriasis, that's what it is. Pityriasis is also known as pityriasis versicolor, because versicolor meaning can be variable in pigmentation. As you can see, you have various different kinds of color changes, because one of the things that this particular fungus interferes with is melanin, right? The fungus in question is actually a fungus that naturally occurs on your skin. We already talked about it a little bit. It's called Malassezia. So Malassezia is one of the fungus, specifically Malassezia furfur. I know that furfur, it causes pityriasis versicolor because furfur is actually something that we eat in Ethiopia, and it's like, it looks like different colors and everything. This does not help you guys at all. But hopefully it will help you understand that in order for you guys to memorize all of these insane diseases and infections and the pathogen that causes them, you need to make really funny kind of associations and apply them basically to your life. So hopefully that'll help. So kind of like mycosis, my gosh, ew, just because I am particularly like disgusted by fungi. Those are things that you should try to make for yourself. These are things that I did when I was a student, and you should try making them for yourself as well. I'm sorry if I repeated this some other place in my lectures, but I feel like this is one of the best ways that students learn. So Malassezia furfur is actually a normal part of your skin microbiome. It lives on you normally, and since it lives on your skin, it's very good at like tolerating it. In fact, it actually feeds off of the oily sebum that we excrete through our sebaceous glands. So this is what causes it. And like I said before, you get these weird kind of different colorations on your skin, patches of scaly skin, hypo or hyperpigmented, resulting from the fungal interference with the with the melanin. I was about to say melatonin, completely different thing. Sorry, it's what I take at night. Okay, sorry, melanin shows the color of your skin, right? So a lot of these kinds of superficial fungi, they produce something known as keratinase. This is really important because on the surface of your skin, we basically have keratinized cells, so cells that are full of keratin, basically dead cells. And so these superficial fungi are able to dissolve keratin because they have the enzyme keratinase, right? So they're able to dissolve keratin, get rid of it, and so you can find it in the hair, nail, and skin, and this is what, they're composed of it. Another really important thing, because they're superficial mycoses, they do not penetrate living things and they don't trigger an immune response. So since they do not go underneath or that superficial layer, they don't go into any kind of muscle tissue or anything like that. They don't end up triggering an immune response. Transmission of these can be basically through anything. Remember, like as long as there's any hyphae or spores found on someone or on something, they can be transmitted. A lot of times with these superficial mycoses is if you share particular fomites, like hairbrushes, for example, right? Hairbrushes and combs, if you share them between, especially teenagers. This is a lot seen very commonly in teenagers as well, because with teenagers, you have your hormones are rampant, right? And so you're secreting more oil and you're making this a very wonderful environment for Malassezia furfur to actually live on your skin because it feeds off of those oils, remember? So since it can get passed on if you share specific fomites, a lot of times several members of the family can be infected at the same time. And adolescents are more likely to be affected. So diagnosis, you can look at the skin under UV light. You shine a particular wavelength of UV light, I believe it's 360 or something like that, 365 on the skin, and it looks like pale green under it. In order for us to have a definite diagnosis, and this is something that you're going to see constantly when it comes to mycoses, comes to fungi, to figure out a definite mycosis and a definite diagnosis, right? And to see exactly which kind of fungus causes it, we look at microscopic examination, because as you'll see in upcoming infections, not just of skin infections, but other kind of mycoses, other kind of fungal infections. A lot of times they're actually caused by more than one kind of fungus. And so it's good to know which specific kind of fungus it causes it in order to actually, treat it better. And so usually we do microscopic examination specifically of the spores. One way that we differentiate one fungi from another is through their asexual spores. So, and then once this is a definite diagnosis, right? And of course, you look at it, visually you can see the diagnostic, but then if you want to know the specific kind, you do a microscopic examination. You get a little, in this cases with skin, you get a little bit of a skin sample, a skin graft, not graft, but skin sample. And then you'll see they can treat it and prepare it with potassium hydroxide and then visualize it under the microscope to look at the actual spores. And then this could be treated with topical or oral drugs. The thing about this though is very recurrent. So even if you could get rid of it, usually it just comes back up, because one thing about fungi is I kind of picture them as icebergs. They look like what you actually see is the small bit of them. It's just a small part of it. And then what you don't see, the iceberg, how icebergs are really, really big underneath the water. Underneath, they're really, really massive. And this is the same thing about any kind of fungus, really, even mushrooms. Mushrooms are what you see, just the mushroom itself is just the reproductive of the fungus. The actual fungus itself is that huge mycelium or a network of hyphae underneath the soil. Okay, so anyways, treated with topical or oral drugs, and it can come back again, especially if not treated to completion. So then we have cutaneous mycosis, also known as dermatophytosis. So with this is kind of a misnomer, because phytosis actually implies that it comes from plants, and it doesn't. It's obviously a fungal thing. Another way we can call these kind of cutaneous mycoses, sometimes you may have heard of the word taenia or ringworm, right? And both taenia and ringworm, taenia actually kind of is kind of it means a kind of tapeworm, okay? Obviously, it's kind of alluding to a worm because they have that particular shape on your skin. They look like a little ring, like a little worm, but they're not actual worms. They come about from fungi infections, so fungal infections. So you have a couple of misnomers that come about with cutaneous mycoses. They're not from plants, they're from fungi. So it's phytosis. I'm not sure why we did that. And then they're sometimes referred to ringworm and tinea in common everyday language, and that as well is not obviously what causes them. It's not a worm. Okay, so cutaneous lesions are caused by some fungi. They're caused by dermatophytes. These are fungi that grow on the skin, the nails, and the hair, and they invade the body. Since they invade the body so that they can go into living tissues, which is opposite of what the superficial mycoses do, because since they're superficial, they're in only dead keratinized cells. These ones can go into living, like they can actually start going into living tissues, and so they can actually cause a cell-mediated immune response that can then go ahead and damage deeper tissues. Okay, so once we have a cell-mediated immune response, this actually goes ahead and starts like destroying different like cells around the actual infection, and so this can damage your deeper cells, your deeper tissues. Signs and symptoms, a variety of clinical manifestations. Again, these ones you can be really familiar with them. An example of a dermatophytic cutaneous mycosis is something like athlete's foot, right? So they are quite common. Yeah, so if you see here, this looks like a worm, right? Like this is ringworm right here. But again, it's not actual ringworm. And if this is athlete's foot. I'm sorry, guys. I'm probably like, you guys are like, ew, this is awesome. And I'm like, no. If you ever want to see how much you can stomach something, look at fungal infections online. Like the images, go Google image. So you can see even like athlete's foot is also known as tinea pedis. Tinea is like, it's kind of like a tapeworm. That's what it technically means, but it's incorrect to say that it's caused by a tapeworm. So you can see all of these are tinea. So other things include like, athlete's foot, right? Or you have these, you guys know what a fungal infection looks like, right? Red raised lesions on and around the toes and soles of the feet. Webbing between the toes is heavily infected. You have jock itch. This can go around the groin and the buttocks. You have, corporis, capitis, pretty much everything nasty. That looks like these red raised lesions, okay? And since they're raised, they kind of look like a worm. So that's why they called it that. Okay, so there's different kinds of pathogens that can cause, this dermatophytosis. So they could be Microsporum, Trichophytum, Epidermophytum flaccosum. I called that one. But these are just three different kinds of fungi. All three can cause these different kinds of cutaneous mycoses. I think skin and nail can occur with all three of them, and then Trichophytum can also affect skin and nail. It can also affect hair, right? Dermophytes can colonize dead layers of skin, nails, and hair. They can use keratin as a nutrient source and then go ahead and continue like deeper and deeper into the tissues. The infection requires the introduction of fungal elements into living deeper layers of the skin. Okay, they're very contagious. They're one of the very few contagious fungi. They can be classified also by their natural habitat. So anthropophilic, that means anthro, they're associated with humans. Zoophilic, they're associated with humans. Geophilic, they're associated with soil. So they can come from everywhere. A lot of fungi, just in general, not just these ones, are basically geophilic. They're soil fungi. And so I'll get to that in just a second. So the diagnostics, treatment, and prevention, it's really easy. Like clinical observation, you see these red raised like bumps, and they can reveal, like you can see that. You can also go ahead and go through look at it microscopically and reveal hyphae or asexual spores for confirmation, and to even see which particular fungus you're dealing with. Their limited infections are treated with topical agents. A lot of times we use ketoconazole for them, right? Those are different azoles. And the azoles can also be used for, I forgot to mention, but for Malsaceus furfur, it can, And then widespread infections are treated with oral drugs as well. Okay, so then we start getting into the really bad ones, wound mycoses, right? Yeah, the really bad one. So some fungi can grow in deep tissues, but they do not necessarily become systemic unless they're really not treated in time, or just pretty much on with neglect. Neglect of these kinds of fungal infections can bring about systemic things. So sometimes they can. Fungi eventually grow into the epidermis to produce skin lesions. So a lot of times, even though they're wound mycoses and they're infecting deeper tissues, they can go ahead and they can show themselves, I guess you say, show themselves on the skin. And this is one of the ways we diagnose them, right? So examples include chromoblastomycoses, phaeohyphomycoses, mycetomas, and sporotrichosis. Gosh. Chromoblastomycoses, this is not my favorite at all. So it's caused by different kinds of species of fungi. I'm going to butcher the name, but it's like Fonsesia, Capiturum, Fonsesia, and then there's another one that starts with phi. Goodness, but you could Google these, but just yeah. If I don't mention them, right? If I don't mention them on my slides, you don't really need to remember which kind of fungi they are. Just know kind of in general what fungi. So an ascomycete. So these are the other ones that their spores are found within an actual like a little sac. Okay. They are technically painless lesions. However, they're incredibly itchy and they can get really bad. In fact, they can get incredibly bad, progressively worsen until you have these kind of like tumor-like nodules, and then we have things like varicose plaques and even cicatricial lesions. And this is, again, if it gets really out of hand. So that's when like either the Fonsesia fungi or the, I can't remember the one that starts with the Phyllophthora. Like Phyllophthora varicosis or something, because it causes these varicose. Anyway, so they're really terrible lesions that can get really bad. I don't know if, is this a picture? Yeah, see, they can get terrible, absolutely terrible. And in fact, they can even like progressively worsen until you get something like lymphedema or even elephantitis, right? And so elephantitis is just when like literally your lymph nodes and everything's swelling, and so your leg looks like an elephant's leg, pretty much. This is how I remember it. It just gets humongous. And so yeah, the presence of these golden brown bodies in the skin is a sample is diagnostic. Treatment requires the removal of the infected tissue and administration of antifungal drugs. And usually it comes about by people who work barefoot in the soil that are at risk. So it usually comes about through like a traumatic kind of, a traumatic implantation from something like a thorn, right? So walking around barefoot in the soil, so this can happen because so one of the main places we find fungi are in the soil, both good fungi and bad fungi. And sometimes these fungi, they can be opportunistic and they can just come inside and like wreak havoc, right? So a lot of people that are kind of prone to these, to these kind of mycoses, especially these more deeper tissue ones, usually work on farms, like either farmland, kind of like they work with agriculture, and they are more prone, and if they walk barefoot. So the biggest way to prevent this is by having appropriate having appropriate clothing and appropriate shoes, right? But if you're anything like me, you love walking barefoot. So the good thing about these, a lot of these, is that most of these are tropical infections, like diseases. And so they're more found like in areas around the equator or even in areas like Asia. So a lot of times it's like Asia, Africa, Southern America. This is where we find them. They're a lot rarer in the USA. So, okay. So yeah, so we have I think I talked about everything. So that's chromoblastomycosis. It can start off as these small little lesions, but it can get progressively worse till we get these varicose plaques, these cicatricial lesions, and like these tumor-like nodules. And then it can also lead to something like lymphedema and elephantitis, etc., which is terrible. Okay, and you get it from the soil. Biohyphomycosis, this is typically caused by the invasion of, again, fungal ascomycetes, again, in traumatic or surgical wounds. This is more variable in presentation than chromoblastomycosis. So it can even be like, it can even come about like pionasal sinus, pyohyphomycosis, or even like it can affect and actively, work against and harm your brain. So it can go in different places as well. So it's a lot more variable than a chromoblastomycosis. And a lot of fungi, like I don't remember, but there's many fungi can cause this. It's just by the introduction of a fungal spore within within a wound, and then you can get it. Okay, so that is chromoblastomycosis. Okay, oh man, mycotomas. Okay, so mycotomas are particularly found in places like Africa, kind of like tropical areas, and like Asia and South America again. So these are caused by several genera of soil fungi. So again, it gets picked up by the soil. So just walking barefoot kind of like brings it up. So the best way to prevent pretty much any of these kinds of fungal infections is just by wearing shoes, right? So just pricks and scrapes introduce the fungi into humans. People who walk barefoot, who work barefoot in soil are most at risk, right? And even if they don't really work barefoot, a lot of these places are very, very hot, right? And so they're wearing things like really flimsy flip-flops. And they're not just like hot places, but usually a little bit more like underdeveloped places. And so they use like a lot of like farmers and everything just have like flimsy flip-flops that allow for, different thorns and everything to just like go right into your foot, and then the introduction of these particular fungi. So with mycotomas, they basically form like humongous, huge tumor-like nodules. So they go ahead and disfigure. This is even like a very nice picture, to tell you the truth. They go ahead and they completely disfigure wherever it's introduced. Usually, again, it's introduced in your feet just because that's what's coming into contact with the soil, but it can technically be introduced everywhere. And if you have the guts, you can look at it, look it up on online and see mycotomas, like even like facial mycotomas are terrible. They completely disfigure your body. So the infections on the skin, the fascia, and the bones. Infections are prevalent in countries near the equator. Diagnosis is based on symptoms, right? And the presence of the symptoms and what it looks like, and the presence of the fungi in clinical samples. So again, just microscopic examination of the skin and like looking at what kind of spores it is. The treatment usually involves literally surgical removal of the mycetoma. So it could also mean like amputation of whatever is infected. So thankfully, how I thankfully quote it in like air quotes, if they do happen usually around like limbs, like your feet, and so you can amputate them without having like the fungus spread anywhere, because these particular fungi are so quick to spread. That's why they can lead to things like elephantitis. They're so quick to spread. And so and you can basically remove them and use like antifungal antifungal therapy. And usually this antifungal therapy has to continue on for years and years, even after something like the amputation of the fungus, because like I said, it spreads really quickly. These hyphae, they just go, right? And you don't even notice them. You don't even see them. And so it takes a really long time. There's a lot. So again, I told you guys that I grew up in Ethiopia, and I would see mycotomas all the time, and just like, especially in like older women, for some reason, older women and older men, and they would just like be sitting and like having their this humongous foot like just kind of propped up somewhere to kind of relieve the pressure, and just unfortunately most of these people that have these type of infections don't have access to good health care, right? And so they end up just like keeping it, and then it keeps spreading, and it can go all the way up, like it can completely like take over your entire leg. So it can cause, so it's really, really sad. It's very sad. And obviously you can imagine just like the pain that it would be, that you have just by putting like walking on it or something. So you stop working, and then it's a whole like thing. We also have sporotrichosis. So this is a cutaneous or subcutaneous disease, which is caused by the inoculation with sporothrix, often by thorn pricks from roses as well. So it's also known as like Rose Gardner's disease. Rose Gardner's disease, again, found usually in places near the equator. It can get really bad, right? And you can try and treat it with all of these kind of like more wound mycoses. We can treat them with different kinds of antifungals, but if you guys remember from chapter 10, antifungals can have extremely bad side effects. In fact, one of the ones that we use to treat sporotrichosis is known as amphotericin B. Another way to call like a nickname that we used to call amphotericin is amphoterrible, because it's just so bad for you. It really harms you. And so it could actually even be fatal to you, like the actual antifungal drug. So anyways, that's a mycetoma. Oh, and this is sporotrichosis. Okay. So then we move on to parasites, parasitic infestations of the skin. Ooh, leishmania. Okay, so leishmania or leishmaniasis caused by the leishmania parasite, right, which is just a protozoan. It's a flagellated protozoan. Not fun. Not fun, especially if neglected, okay? So first off, it's a zoonotic disease, so it can be transferred from animals. It's transmitted to humans. The way it's transferred from animals to humans is not through anything like licks or bites or anything like that. Well, maybe even bites it could be. But usually it's from something known as a sandfly. Where is this? It should be here somewhere. So a sandfly can basically bite these animals that act as reservoirs. A lot of times the animals that act as reservoirs are things like rodents or even wild dogs. Could also be domestic dogs. Another thing to kind of put your mind at ease is this is usually is very rare in the US. It's usually found in, again, areas like Africa, Southern America, Asia, right? But this is something that I remember being not exposed to, like I didn't get it, but I saw it very often. So you have like these rodents and domestic dogs and wild dogs that are reservoirs of it. And then if the sandfly bites them and then it bites you, it can transfer over the actual parasitic protozoan to you, which is called leishmania, right? The protozoan itself is known as leishmania, and then leishmania goes inside of you. So this particular protozoan, the reason why it needs these reservoirs is because it can, and a host to actually, like a vector, sorry, to bring it from one host to another, is because it's an intracellular protozoan, meaning it has to live within cells in order to replicate. And in fact, it actually goes in and it goes into your own immune system cells, specifically your macrophages, and it basically hijacks your macrophages, infects them, and it causes, like inside your macrophages, it actually replicates, and as it replicates, it destroys the tissue surrounding it, right? And so you start getting these lesions. So a lot of times, there's three different kinds of leishmaniasis. You have cutaneous leishmaniasis. This is the most common one. This produces large, painless skin ulcers. So these kind of like where your tissue is dead, that form around the bite wounds made by the disease vector. Okay, I want to show you guys a picture. Okay, so you can see that you have this death of your tissue and on your skin. So this is cutaneous leishmaniasis. These large painless skin ulcers that form around bite wounds or where the sandfly bit you, right? And yeah, exactly, where the sandfly bit you. And if you can see in the actual parasite goes, this is what the picture is here, it goes within your macrophages, within your immune system cells. If this is neglected, right? So this is not usually fatal. This isn't usually fatal. It can happen anywhere. A lot of times it can happen like on your hands and then sometimes it can even happen on your face, wherever the sandfly bit you. And so within your face, it is quite bad because these things do heal. They do leave scars. And so you can have like these remaining scars on your face. Mucocutaneous ones. So this is when it can get it can progress. And this basically goes ahead and the parasite infects your membranes. So it can go in your mouth, your nose, your soft palate, even your lungs sometimes, very, very rarely. Here, it does the same thing. So it just, since it's growing and replicating your macrophages, it's destroying the tissue around it. So the damage can be like very severe here. It's usually not fatal. However, I do want to just, I know your book says it's usually not fatal, but I do want to just point it out. It can be fatal if the damage is so severe in your mouth and in your nose and where you breathe that it can force you to, like, you can't breathe anymore properly, and so you die of asphyxiation. So that can sometimes be fatal, but it's not fatal. Like, it's usually not fatal. So that's mucocutaneous. It goes ahead and like it invades the mucosal membranes. It can also be, the third kind is visceral, and this is the really bad one. Typically, it's fatal if untreated. Here, your parasite is spread by the macrophages throughout the rest of your body, So, yeah. So, in this example right here, this is mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, and you can see how it's just it just damages your tissues and is extremely disfiguring. And yeah, especially if it goes inside like your throat, that's when it can become a real problem and you can't breathe. So eventually, like, it can be treated, right? And you can, like, it goes away, but then you have that permanent disfiguration or those, the scars that result. Okay, the pathogen is, again, that protozoan, the parasitic protozoan caused leishmania. It's a flagellated protozoan, commonly hosted by wild and domestic dogs and small rodents. So a lot of times, one of the ways that we try to get rid of this disease, especially like the prevalence of the disease in an area, is by removing the rodents and the wild dogs, etc., from that particular place. So this is one of the ways that third world countries do this. Infected female sandflies are the ones that transmit it, from animals to humans, and they transmit it through their bites. So how does it work? Like I said, it infects the macrophages, it replicates inside of them, and it stimulates inflammatory responses, which destroy the rest of your surrounding tissues. This is endemic in parts of the tropics and subtropics. So again, you'll find it usually in like Africa, Southern America, Central America, and even actually in Mediterranean countries. So yeah, this diagnostics is you can diagnose it by microscopic identification of the protozoan as well. Most cases heal without treatment. Antimicrobials are needed for severe infections because at that point, bacteria can go in and wreak havoc since your wounds are so exposed. Prevention involves reducing exposure by controlling the reservoir host, right? So like I said, some countries literally remove the which is good, get rid of the rodents, but it gets a little bit sad when you think about getting rid of like the wild dogs, etc. And then the other main thing that is to somehow control the sandfly population, which is very hard. And controlling any kind of insect population is very difficult. However, you can prevent it. I'm not sure why it's not written here, but you can prevent it by just wearing proper insect repellents, right? Insect repellents and taking measures to get rid of any insects from your home. Okay. Scabies, moving on to scabies, which give me the heebie-jeebies, heebie-jeebies, can't say it, heebie-jeebies. So scabies, some students confuse this with scrapie, okay? Do not confuse it with scrapie. Scrapie, it has a P in it, it is a prion disease. We've kind of talked about prions very briefly. Prions are those infectious protein agents that pretty much infect and, tear down and destroy your neurological function. Okay, and so scrapie is actually a prion disease coming from sheep, right? Scabies is not that. Scabies actually comes about thanks to, mites, legit mites, right? We know that mites can, pass certain infections along. So if the mite bites you, it can pass on particular bacteria like rickettsia. It's like a Japanese name, Tsutsugamushi, something like that. Tsutsugamushi, I think it's called. Rickettsia or Tsutsugamushi, or it's also known as Orientia Tsutsugamushi, and this can give you typhus. So like a particular kind of typhus, scrub typhus, I think it's called. But mites themselves, okay, can also cause problems, the mites, you can have literally mites living within your skin, okay, and within your tissue. So this is characterized by intense itching because you got legit mites in your skin, okay, not nice, and a rash at the infectious site. The rash is a pimple-like irritation or short, slightly raised burrows under the surface of the skin. A lot of times the surface of the skins that are really kind of affected are things like you behind your knee, like elbow creases, your genitalia, between your fingers, right? Wrists, elbows, and knees. So those are just different places that usually the type of rash and the mites are found in. Okay, but they can spread throughout, especially if you scratch them, which you scratch because they're really, really itchy, incredibly itchy. I just cannot, guys, sorry. So if you scratch them, then you can introduce them to other areas of your skin. So they can technically happen wherever, it's just that they're usually found within foldings, like any place where you have like a folded skin structure, right? Like your elbow, wherever, like even like your wrist, that's technically folded. This is where they thrive in. So it's caused by the mite, right? So it's called Sarcoptes scabiei, whatever. They're caused by mites. These mites cause scabies because they basically burrow inside of your skin. They can cause inflammation. They can damage your nerve endings because they're burrowing inside your skin. And so that's what it's about. So usually, sorry. So that's what it looks like. This is an amazing like electron microscope picture of scabies of your mites in the human skin. So the itching blisters, they occur because it gets better, guys. The female mites can lay eggs, right? And so that's where the itchiness comes about. The mites are transmitted via prolonged bodily contact, or the main one is basically through fomites. So fomites like bedding, clothing, towels, bedding, that kind of stuff. And this is especially seen in crowded conditions. So think hospitals, nurseries, especially in places like refugee camps as well. I know a lot of refugee camps that have like scabies is prevalent. So yeah, so this is where it can happen. To get rid of them, you basically have to burn them. No, but it's like washing and like hot water, like high temperatures. So burning, technically your bedding could be an option. Okay, that's what I would do. I would burn it. Okay, so diagnostics is made by observing the mites, eggs, or fecal matter in the skin scrapings or the characteristic burrows. This is actually kind of hard because there's not a lot of mites that infect you. Thankfully, there's only about usually 10 mites that infect during scabies. And so they're very hard to find, but you can find their remnants, right? Like their wastes. You can see that. You can treat it with mite-killing lotions and cleaning of contaminated items. These mite-killing lotions also can penetrate within your bloodstream, so you don't want to expose people like pregnant ladies or immunocompromised people to these things. So cleaning of the contaminated items of fomites is pretty much the best thing you want to do. Is that's prevention and just making sure you don't get it over and over again. So you wash in hot water and dry it in a hot dryer to kill the mites and their eggs, or my preferred method, burning. Okay, sorry. So prevention is just good personal hygiene. It's the best way to prevent things. So washing and laundering your clothes often and putting them through a hot dryer. So that is it for chapter 19. This is particularly gruesome, and it's going to get even more gruesome and more interesting from here on out, I think. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I shall see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.